Hey everyone, Paul Bertorelli for AVweb. This week we reported on a new airplane model from Cirrus called the SR10. This is a picture of it, and it turns out this was developed by Cirrus under contract in both China and the U.S., and pretty quietly too. If you guess this is intended to be a trainer, well, you guessed right. It does have a U.S. type certificate, but won't be marketed in North America for now. In China, where it's called the AG100, certification is underway with a plan to market it there in the training industry. In the Zoom room here, I've got McIver. She's executive director of Cirrus's SR line, basically the piston engine aircraft. So, Ivy, give us the details on the SR10.
The SR10 and the AG100 was actually kind of a joint project. So it was something that the shareholder contracted Cirrus to do. That kind of enabled us to hire a pretty substantial handful of engineers to develop the project. It was kind of developed in parallel. And the idea for the AG100 was that the Cirrus team would design, develop, and get the FAA type certificate, and in parallel, our shareholder would be developing the AG100. They will then now use the SR10 type certificate to achieve CAAC type certification for the AG100, and then sell that in the Chinese market.
Okay, so maybe I had a misunderstanding. Was this developed in China or in the U.S.?
It was contracted to be developed in the U.S.
Okay, so the pictures we had of it appeared to be a test flight. The initial test flight, which, excuse me, was in last year, in June of last year. Was that in China or the U.S.?
Well, interestingly enough, there's been both. So while we developed sort of the SR10 piece, we were working very closely with the team in China as they were kind of developing in parallel the AG100. So the AG100 has flown in China, the SR10 has flown in the US. The type certificate for the SR10 has been achieved with the FAA, and now they are pursuing the CAAC type certificate for the AG100.
Okay, but we're essentially talking about the identical airplane here.
They're identical airplanes, yep.
Okay, so what this is a single engine composite, three-seat airplane. It's, I guess, composite and carbon fiber and a Rotax power plant. In the story, I mentioned that it's presently there are no plans to sell this in the North American market. Could that change? You have the option to do it?
Yep, that's correct. So we have no plans to do so. The idea from the get-go was that this was developed under a contract basis, as I said. We do have the option to commercialize within the North American market, but that is not in our roadmap and not in our plans at all. We have the type certificate, don't have the production certificate, and essentially now we're pretty capacity constrained. So market for our current product lines is really healthy, and our manufacturing facility is at capacity with building the SRs and the Vision Jet product line. So there's really no capacity to do that. There's really no market demand to develop it. So it's kind of something that we developed for the shareholder. We have the option to commercialize, but we have no plans to commercialize that. We're here to help the shareholder basically enable their commercialization in China as they plan to do.
Now, looking at the type certificate, I assume that this is a Part 23 airplane, probably a CS-23 airplane. It was not developed in anticipation of Mosaic?
No, just straight Part 23.
So in China, would there be more demand for this type of airplane, do you think, rather than the SR20 configured as a trainer?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess it sort of remains to be seen. I know that there are some orders for this airplane. Obviously, it's a less expensive airplane to build. It's a less expensive airplane to acquire. It's simpler. There's less seats. So, one could assume that there might be a bigger market for that in the training arena. I mean, I think it kind of remains to be seen.
Yeah. Now, this looking at it, you would look at it and say, that's really an SR20, but it isn't. Would you consider this a
Mm-mm.
clean sheet airplane?
It's absolutely a clean sheet airplane. It's kind of interesting if you looked at it from afar and you weren't looking very closely, and you maybe were a couple of steps removed from the familiarity with Cirrus, you might
Mhm.
think it looks like a Cirrus. It's a similar design ideal, but it was a clean sheet design. The fuselage is smaller, the wingspan is shorter, the tail is a little smaller. The horizontal is a little higher. There's no baggage compartment. The interior is really pretty Spartan. Obviously, the cowl is purpose built for housing the Rotax engine. It's got an empty propeller, so from pretty far afar, it kind of has a hint of Cirrus. And it was sort of some of the design philosophies of keep it simple, keep the windows big, have the yoke as a side yoke, easy modern avionics, that sort of thing. Those design principles translated, but it's a clean sheet.
So that raises the next question is, so in 25 years of building and selling the SR20, and now you get a chance to clean sheet an airplane, which is rare these days. Uh,
Mhm.
what what went into it from that experience? Any changes to speak of?
Good question. I think there was some interesting learning that took place, and this is kind of part of the reason why we jumped at the chance to pick up the contract, which was it enabled us to hire a substantial amount of engineers, do a clean sheet design, and there are definitely some things within that design that we're able to take a look at and see if we can actually kind of um, slot them in or kind of weave them into future design states of the SR product line.
Now, I have a couple questions on the Rotax. One is that according to type certificate, it specifies 100 low lead, which is a bit of a
It does.
surprise because the
Yep.
Rotax engines can burn 91. And also, slight deficit in power to weight, about 4% difference. So the SR20 would have a better power to weight than the SR10 would. So what about the fuel first?
Yeah, great question. I honestly don't know what the plans are for the fuel for the AG100. Obviously the Rotax engine is certified for 100 low lead as well as a couple other unleaded fuels. That's not what we certified on the SR10 for this particular type certificate. Not to say that the shareholder could, when they go to certify the AG100, explore other fuels. It would just be, a matter of, I think, testing, certification, that sort of thing.
Yeah. What about the power? Significant that is 4 or 5% less in power to weight. Is in the U.S. that might be an issue with high density altitude areas, but is it in China?
Again, great question. I don't know exactly how they plan to use it in China and where they plan to sell it and things like that. Or if they plan to, alter the type certificate or go after like different engines, more powerful engines, that sort of thing. So, like I said, we were just sort of contracted to get this part of it over the finish line. And what they do with it from now, I guess, kind of depends on what they see as the possible market.
Now, you've used the term shareholder. I assume that means AVIC, AVIC
Yes,
International?
correct. Yep.
Okay. Um, what is the trainer market like in China at the moment? And I ask that in the context of Cirrus, according to Gamma figures, has sold last year 32 SR20s in China, which I assume are probably sold for trainers, which is
Mhm.
quite a noticeable trend because we haven't seen those kinds of sales to this point. So is the domestic training industry picking up there?
Um, it's interesting the way that you phrase it, the domestic training industry. I think a lot of the purchases and deliveries are to um, like training facilities, bigger training fleets and things like that. So most of those sales are actually to fleets. They're not to the training market in China is much different than here, right? So it's not like there's flight schools with a couple of airplanes on airports that you can rock up to and learn how to fly, right? It's very much either like an institutional training entity or I wouldn't say military, but like airline, military. It's very much
Mhm.
more institutional, university, that sort of thing. So it's much more fleet based than it is sort of a retail based.
Now, as I understand it, those SR20s that went over there are kits.
Um, yes, I'm trying to think if all of them are. I'm not 100% sure all of them are. Some of them are kits, some of them are what we call just sort of overseas shipment, where they'll just get rebuilt there. So,
And
and you'll
kits,
actually see that on the Gamma report. So anything that we delivered um is an actual aircraft. Anything that AVic delivered, as like if you look at the Gamma report, it says AVic delivered SR20s and Cirrus delivered SR20s. So the ones that Cirrus delivered are actual aircraft. The one that AVic delivered are kits delivered to AVic, and then they built the kits and then they delivered the aircraft.
and does kit mean they get all the composites and all the parts and they just assemble there?
Um, so yes and no. Like it's a the kit's pretty far along when we send it to China, but there is assembly, test flying, and certification there. And those planes actually do have a Chinese data plate. They don't come with an FAA data plate
I
or a
see.
Cirrus
Okay.
data plate. It's a Chinese data plate that's an AVIC data plate.
So you and I, 4 years ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago, flew in the demonstrator model of I believe it was SR22 track training
Mhm.
airplane. So Cirrus has been developing that line. Where are you with the development of that? I see there are SR20 versions now and an SR22T. So you've got a full line of aircraft. What's going on in that market?
Yep, absolutely. So that's our basically fleet training arm for the SR product line. So we do have a track for 20, 22, and 22T. It really is the same type certificate, same airframe, same avionics, same engine, kind of same bones as the retail SR20. But as far as the features and configuration, it's configured for a fleet training market. So if you look at kind of the base retail airplane, there are a fair amount of options in there so that it's a very well equipped airplane for someone to hop into and either learn how to fly or fly their family around or whatever you're going to do with it. And then there's packages of additional features that you can add to the airplane and configure it. For the track airplane, the base configuration it has is kind of less optioned, so that it's the price of acquisition for a base airplane for a fleet is more cost effective, and then the packages are a little bit more structured to be tailored to a fleet training environment, a little bit less than the retail. Things like non-leather interiors, so like really utilitarian high wear interiors, things like a landing gear simulator, and a rear push to talk, so someone can sit in the back and actually engage with the radios if you're doing kind of a Gemini type of configuration for training. So like I said, the bones are the same as a retail 20. There's just more options that are fleet specific.
And are you finding some sales traction there?
Yeah, absolutely. The demand is actually quite high, both on the university side and sort of on the purpose-built kind of flight institution side. And we're seeing globally that market pick up.
For the 20 or the 22 or both?
To be honest, it's mostly the 20, but there definitely is interest on the 22 as well. It just kind of depends on like what the level of the institution and the tenants and the kind of mission of the flight training institution.
And speaking of the overall market, it has, I'll show a graph here plotting the numbers back 10 years ago, 2012, basically. That reflects recovery from the downturn of 2008 in there. But then 2021 to 22 were really impressive years. I mean, there was significant growth in there. What
Yep.
exactly is going on there as far as demand, or is it higher production capability, or both?
I'd say it's both. In spring of 2020, our worlds got quite different than it had ever been, at least in my lifetime. And there was a significant pause and a lot of questions being answered in terms of what are we doing here, right? Not in the aviation world, but like in the world in general, right? And I think what you saw was sort of a level of market drop. But that market drop was pretty short-lived because in that span where airline travel was severely curtailed, business travel was severely curtailed. A lot of things got, obviously there was a lot of health concerns, people very reluctant to travel on, a more public transportation, and airlines couldn't get, even if you did want to get on an airline, they couldn't get you where you were going. So we did see this. So that in combination with a lot of folks working from home, so suddenly had more time on their hands because they didn't have to commute and they weren't doing any business travel, but they were still working, bringing in money. So you had a lot of people with more time and the same amount of money, and an aversion to travel, and I'd say almost a reset of prioritization of travel and family and friends and that sort of thing. And all of that was like this perfect storm of, hey, I've always wanted to learn how to fly, maybe now's the time, right? Or hey, I have my license, I think I should utilize this for travel versus traveling in some other way. And there was almost like this twofold bump, right? So there was a bump of people who had time, money, interest, and desire to avoid traveling on a public platform. So there was a tranche of people who had an interest in aviation who started to pursue it. Then there was almost a secondary bump of people who had no interest in aviation, who found that the people that they were that were in their circle, or the people, their peers and things like that, who were interested in aviation, were starting to use aviation to their benefit, right? So for business travel, for personal travel, for whatever that was. And that ended up sort of attracting people who had never thought of it before, but a little bit of a, hey, my friends are doing it. This seems actually attainable and approachable. Maybe I should do it too, right? So you kind of got this like twofold bump. And we saw that surge sort of start in late 2020 and then continue to increase in 21 and 22. So there was an increased market demand, which caused us to up our production and increase our manufacturing process. So now we've got a much higher capacity to manufacture airplanes. We're producing and certifying more airplanes per week. We're delivering more airplanes to the public. And that market demand, though it's not quite as high as we saw at the height in 21 and 22, is still incredibly strong, especially domestically.
Yeah, so if you look at the numbers, that little shift there that represents people who weren't previously interested in aviation and want to use it for travel is worth 80 to 100 airplanes a year, which in total is not a huge number, but compared to the previous years is a significant number. So what's the backlog like now, and where are you with production? The last time I was at Cirrus, there was a pretty general agreement that there wouldn't be a giant investment to do a tremendous increase in production capability, but an incremental increase. Is that still pretty much the thinking?
I mean, I guess it's all relative, right? So we producing somewhere along the lines of like 12 to 14 airplanes a week. That's about where we are and about where we'll stay. For forecasts for 2024 are better than 2023 in terms of production capacity and our deliveries. So
And what's the order backlog like now? Say if I wanted an SR22T, what would the wait be?
yeah, it's about 12 to 18 months, kind of depending on what you're looking at.
Okay. And you're also, are you expanding in Duluth with some kind of customer center or something up there?
It's not a customer center, it's actually an innovation center. So we purchased a building on the north side of the Duluth airport. I think it used to be the AAR building maybe, but it's a huge building actually on the north side of the airport. And all of engineering, experimental, flight test, that's all moving over to the north side. So we've started that move. There's a fair amount of teams that are already over there. Our experimental team is over there, our engineering team is over there. And what that's allowed us to do is basically take the facility that we have on the south side of the airport and dedicate that to pretty much just production and manufacturing.
So I bet there's a skunk works over there, huh? And I bet there are some new products underway there. Would that
Yes,
be
100%. Yes.
And you're not going to tell me what they are, I'm sure.
No. And that's, to be honest, Paul, that is one of the reasons why I think Cirrus is so cool. And I've been here for 17 years and gets me up in the morning is that there is always stuff going on. There's always projects that are going on. Many never see the light of day, but there's a really passionate group of people that's constantly looking for new technologies, looking at the market needs, what the market wants, and just testing stuff out. And sometimes it's laughable, and sometimes there's genius in there. And then, when the market conditions are right and the genius level is high enough, we come out with something cool.
Yeah, well, you've done okay here. I mean, if we're looking at the sales figures just for 21 and 22, you must be doing something right to get 20 or 21% increase in sale. That's really pretty good in this market. All right, Ivy McIver, thank you very much. I think we're up to date with Cirrus now, and I expect we're going to hear something on more new products in the next couple of years. Thanks for talking with us.
I can absolutely confirm this is the case. So let's keep in touch, Paul. It's great to talk to you.